Welcome back to Within the Book, a series where we explore what's within the book of tabletop role-playing game design. Today we talk about emergent narrative and designing rules to encourage it. You may not know what emergent narrative is, but you've likely experienced it as it's core to tabletop role-playing games. Rather than give you a Wikipedia definition, I'll tell you a story. In a Pathfinder campaign I played in, we were attacked by a dragon, and this dragon was tearing us up. So my character, a charismatic sorcerer, told the party to throw their weapons down and offered our services to the dragon. The GM called for a diplomacy roll, and I rolled a nat 20. After some cheering, the GM called for a break. During the break, he asked whether I was willing to have my character be taken by the dragon in exchange for the safety of the party. I accepted, and this one event changed my character, as when he rejoined after some weeks, he'd become a paladin under the tutelage of the Order of Paladins who had founded him after the events with the dragon. This is an emergent narrative, as the GM in this story hadn't intended its outcome, but interpreted the nat 20 in a certain way that changed the intended narrative. The opposite of emergent narrative is embedded narrative, basically what a GM intends for a scenario. Emergent versus embedded narrative is stepping into GM advice, which is not really my expertise, but suffice to say that the narrative of a game tends to struggle if it's purely one or the other. For an emergent narrative to feel impactful, there should be at the very least a loose embedded structure. In short, due to the nature of player improvisation, problem solving, creative thinking, and interpreting random chance through elements such as dice, emergent narrative is core to TTRPGs. There are ways to encourage and, importantly, reward cool moments of emergent narrative through a game's mechanics. This is a big reason why I enjoy random resolution mechanics in games. Ultimately, this is something that can create memorable moments that you will be likely reminiscing with your gaming group for years. Who would want to do that?
To make people happy.
Look at me, I'm making people happy. I'm the magical man from Happy Land. While I believe randomness is important to the process of encouraging emergent narrative, it's only one part of a greater system. Another part is to provide a consistent structure for that randomness. A simple example of this is the highest result of a die being the best result and a lowest being the worst. In other words, a critical hit or a critical fail, as seen in many games. Another example of something like this is from the Genesis RPG. This game uses a dice pool system, but importantly for this example, it has results on the dice called Advantage, Triumph, Threat, and Despair. Advantage and Triumph are good for the player, while Threat and Despair are bad. This is because they cancel Advantage and Triumph respectively. To put it simply, if a dice pool has more Advantage or Triumph than Threat or Despair, the player may use abilities or equipment. But if there are more Threat or Despair, complications can arise that are determined by the GM in a way that makes sense fictionally. Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition has a few different examples of this, but they all interact with Vampire's resolution system. The first is margins. Vampire uses a dice pool system that counts the number of successes against the target number. If successes exceed the target number, the excess number is known as the margin of success. This can be used to determine how successful the action was. Vampire also uses a mechanic they call win at a cost. Basically, if a player fails a roll, but the roll contains some successes, any player can offer a cost for the roll to succeed. This cost is suggested to scale with the number of missing successes and could be anything from attracting unwanted attention or gaining a hunger point. As vampires get more hunger points, it becomes more likely they will suffer a complication from their hunger. To put it simply, critical successes with hunger dice cause what the designers call a mess, which the GM and players determine based on the fiction and can cause more trouble for the player. Critical failures with hunger dice cause bestial failure, which can force some serious complications for the players. My last example is an extreme one. In the game Everway, the GM has 3 actions known as laws. These are the law of karma, drama, and fortune. The law of karma, in the words of the designers, is when common sense prevails. If a character's ability score is higher than the task, they succeed in that task. When the plot demands a character succeed or fail, the GM can use the law of drama. The designers do stress that drama lives in the range of the possible and the probable. If you use drama to create events that are hard to believe, the players will find the story less satisfying. I find this is important to highlight as I think it can be applied to our overall topic, but I'll come back to this later. Finally, we have the Law of Fortune, and the spiciest part of Everway. When the previous laws fail, you can use the Law of Fortune to draw a card from the Fortune deck. The Fortune deck is 36 cards, with each card having a different meaning based on whether or not it was drawn upside down. For example, the War card means great effort or effort misspent if the card was drawn upside down. The Law of Fortune doesn't indicate immediate success or failure, meaning in the case of the War card, the players could narrowly survive a dangerous enemy by expending great effort. The designers of Everway also encourage the combination of the Law of Fortune with one of the other laws. For instance, the GM could combine the Law of Karma and Fortune when a character is attempting to overcome a difficult task, allowing for the heart of the cards. While all this is a little long-winded, I think it serves to say that to encourage emergent narrative, you want to target your resolution mechanic, as this will often influence a player's actions. A well-honed structure should assist your players in telling stories rather than bogging them down. Some of you may have picked up on this or already know this, but for emergent narrative to exist, players need to make choices, and those choices need to matter. They need to have both positive and/or negative consequences based on the current fiction. Like drama in Everway, if a positive or negative consequence is too hard to believe, it'll create dissatisfaction. While the threat of failure is a consequence, it being the sole consequence is a little old-fashioned. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with this, but many games include fail-forward/success with a cost mechanics as they provide structure for emergent narrative. The win at a cost mechanic we previously talked about from Vampire is an example of this. To further this, you want to consider ways for the GM to include players in having more narrative control. The creative use of spells and actions in games like D&D can provide some level of narrative control. But I'm sure some of you would have experience with GMs that are too rules as written focused, or maybe a GM who is too into the rule of cool. I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is a result of having a rules first mindset rather than a fiction first mindset. Neither is superior to the other, but it's useful to know the difference when designing TTRPGs. And again, it's really up to the style of game you're designing. With all this said, a mechanic like Aspects in Fate can be very useful for handing narrative control to players, and said control directly relating to emergent narrative. To further elaborate on this, the creation of a starting character's aspects is already seeding future and current emergent narrative. Take an aspect like Captain of the Skyship Nimbus. Assuming the GM and players are cool with it, this aspect informs the players that skyships exist and this character is a captain, making them very knowledgeable about skyships. I could go on about Fate aspects in this context, but it's going to be easy for you all to read or play it if you haven't already. If you know, you know. Also, Fate has a systems reference document, or SRD, so check that out if you don't have the book. Another way to encourage emergent narrative is through rewards. While rewarding experience is fine and dandy, sometimes it's not enough. I would suggest a meta reward. Think of inspiration from D&D, but actively encourage through more than just suggestions. My issue with inspiration is the lack of concrete structure for rewarding it. This contributes to GMs forgetting to award it while in the moment. Not to keep harping on about Fate, but it's a good example of awarding a meta reward that ties in nicely with emergent narratives. The use of the compel mechanic compensates the player for suffering an emergent complication by giving the player additional fate points. In some cases, it's a reward for the player as they can self-compel if it makes sense and also receive a fate point in return. This can then be used to invoke aspects, creating a perfect circle, kinda. If you're into experience but want a more emergent way, I'd suggest looking into Lady Blackbird. This game uses what it calls keys. The keys of a character are what motivates them or what title the character has. For example, Key of the Outcast or Key of Vengeance. By taking actions related to your character's keys, you earn experience. This is called hitting a key. If hitting a key gets you into danger, you earn more experience. Lastly, if a character overcomes their key by triggering their buy-off, they earn a large chunk of experience. A character buy-off is representative of them overcoming their key in a narrative sense. So in the key of vengeance example, it would be forgiving whoever wronged your character. All this is so key because it systemizes character growth in a way that applies to emergent and embedded narratives equally. This game sounds cool. I wonder who wrote it. Duh! In our game behind the scenes, we've encouraged emergent narrative in various ways. First, it uses 5 tiers of resolution based on the number of successes or fails remaining in a pool. These tiers are succeeding, advantage, neutral, disadvantage, and failing. Succeeding is the best outcome and is our version of a critical hit. This should provide added benefits to the player. Advantage is a good outcome, but is intended to leave room for potential failure in future rolls. Neutral is a partial success and should come with a cost. Disadvantage is a bad outcome, but should leave room for success at a major cost or with creative thinking. Failing is the worst outcome and is our version of a critical failure. This should cause a complication for the player. We call this the tracker. The names of the individual tiers could be more evocative, but that's something I want to cover in a future video. Second, we've talked about our persona mechanic before, but I figured I'd bring up some changes from playtesting that are relevant to the topic at hand. For the uninitiated, the persona mechanic is similar to Fate aspects, but worse. We felt during playtesting that personas weren't as applicable as we wanted them to be, so instead of just adding positive dice when applicable, we decided that personas could have a range of benefits. So far, we've been testing 3 options: a single die reroll, starting the pool with 1 success, and adding a positive dice. This I feel widens the emergent potential of personas while not affecting the game too much. Third is our fallout mechanic. This is our attempt at systemizing random events, and so far during playtesting, I've been very dissatisfied with it. And I think this is because we tried to force emergent narrative without providing enough support. We have attempted to remedy this situation by changing how the GM tracks fallout and how the severity increases. To put it simply, whenever a fallout is rolled, it ticks a GM tracked number down. When this number reaches 0, it triggers a fallout event. The severity of the event is influenced by the highest number of a fallout rolled in a single pool. Thanks for watching the video. Let us know what you want to hear us talk about next. Do all those YouTube things and see you next time.